of course, the reason we're all here is we have Anna Marsh, and she has such a long list of credentials, it would take multiple slides to put them all up. So Anna, I apologize. I just sort of cherry picked a few to put up here. And if you're interested, you can scan this QR code here to take you to her very beautiful website. It puts mine to shame, and it's got a lot of really amazing things there. With this, I'd love to turn this over to you, Anna. And I know we have a lot of great content today. We're talking about, blood sugar and a ton of things to do with that. But before we dive in, I think it's always helpful and interesting for people to know, like, how did you get here? What got you passionate about this work that you're doing?
Yeah, and when we were talking before the interview started, I said that's a very loaded question. We could spend a whole hour just kind of talking about how I got into this, but I'll try to keep it succinct. Basically, I've had fatigue experiences, shall we call them, on and off since a child. And that was something that really shaped my interest in health from a young age, and hence my very long list of qualifications. That was sort of in pursuit of my passion, which has always been health and human performance. And also I have a great interest in helping people like yourself, Raelan. I'm a natural helper, and the work that I do is not only because I'm a science nerd, but it's also because I have an interest in people and how I can help people more in their lives. But anyway, through this whole journey, I had my own fatigue experience, I guess. I was diagnosed eventually with chronic fatigue syndrome, which I think was due to mold, which I eventually discovered later, and digestive issues and trauma and all of these things that are kind of part and parcel of chronic fatigue syndrome. And that really changed the trajectory of my business and my career, and got me really passionate about taking all that studying that I'd done and really channeling it into helping people with fatigue and people with chronic illness specifically. And one of the things that I talk about a lot and I'm very passionate about is blood sugar.
So this is such an amazing topic. I'm so glad we're going through it. I have personally struggled with blood sugar throughout my whole life, so I'm very interested to learn more about it. But I think a good place to start would be just generally telling us why it's important, why we should care about it. And specifically, if you're facing fatigue conditions, why does this matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I often say is that, this is something that's important for all humans, whether you have a chronic illness, whether you're just a little bit tired, whether you're a lot tired, like someone with chronic fatigue syndrome or something else. Blood sugar is just one of the foundations of health. And, when we're looking at somebody who has a chronic illness or has been diagnosed with something like chronic fatigue syndrome, what we really want to do in the early stages of supporting them is to find this sort of sense of stability. And I know you've had a chronic fatigue experience, and many of the listeners would have had as well. You probably know that when you first get diagnosed, even before diagnosis, when you feel like something isn't quite right, it feels very chaotic. You feel all over the place. You don't know if you're coming or going. So we kind of have to control what we can control. And we also have to find a sense of stability within ourselves. And there's, certain pillars that I would say that we want to stabilize, like sleep and the nervous system and our movement practices and maybe digestion as well. But blood sugar is definitely one of those big sort of stabilizers that we want to get a handle on, because it just creates such a really nice foundation on which we can build as we're working on feeling better and working on our recovery. So the thing is with blood sugar is that, we don't want it to be too high or we don't want it to be too low. We want it to be sort of within a narrow window. Because if our blood sugar goes too high, it's staying in the bloodstream, which means it's not getting to the brain where we would like it to be, or into our muscles where we would like it to be. And that really affects our physical energy and physical function. But on the flip side of that, if it gets too low, then that can create some what we would call oxidative stress. So essentially, there's a lot of free radicals in the body and they're creating damage. And one of the things that does is it negatively impacts our ability to produce energy through the mitochondria. So we've kind of got very high blood sugar on one side, which is impacting, energy getting into the cells. And we've got very low blood sugar, which is impacting the cell's ability to make energy. And if we're constantly swinging between the two all day, we're just not going to feel good. And that's why if we can stabilize blood sugar, we can stabilize any energy production to a degree. Obviously, there's lots of other things going on as well, but it's one of the things that when life feels totally out of control, that we can have some control over.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of us take for granted. I was always aware of blood sugar issues, but I didn't think they were really a big deal. And when I was in the middle of my chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, recovery journey, one of my doctors diagnosed me with hypoglycemia. So me being me, read every book that exists on the topic. And it was crazy, the impact that hypoglycemia alone, when not managed well, can have on a person's health and on their energy levels. And I actually, for a while, became convinced that this was my whole issue, like that I was going to, fully recover by addressing my hypoglycemia. It ended up being a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't the whole thing for me, unfortunately, but it made a dramatic difference. The things that I learned, how some of the things that I was chalking up to CFS with my major energy crashes and the unpredictability for me anyways, of those ups and downs, once I got a better sense of my food, made a really big difference. So, it didn't make me 100% better, but it made my days, for the most part, a lot more stable energy and more predictable energy, which was a game changer in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say your experience is very similar to most people's when they start addressing their blood sugar. I think there's actually just not enough emphasis put on it in fatigue recovery generally, like in terms of like drilling down and getting to the nuance of like what you actually have to do to have it stable and what stable actually means. And I'm sure we're going to go into that in a moment.
How would someone even know if blood sugar problem was, or how would someone even know if they had an imbalance or if they had an issue with blood sugar?
Yeah, so in my own journey, blood sugar was something I had to look at. So you described you had hypoglycemia, which is a tendency towards low blood sugar. I actually had hyperglycemia, so a tendency towards higher blood sugar. And it was a complete blind spot for me. So I had no idea until I actually started to do some post-meal glucose monitoring, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think that also can be that kind of high stress archetype where people are quite disconnected from their bodies and what's going on each day. They're not necessarily paying attention to the signals of their body. But if you are paying attention to what's going on in your body, it might be waking with low energy, which is most people with fatigue, but it can be getting really hangry and not being able to go without eating for like a couple of hours. So you might eat a meal and then 2 hours later, you just really feel like you need to eat again. So there's not a flexibility in the metabolism to just, have a few hours without eating. It can be losing function before a meal. So sometimes people will get tired, they'll start to lose their cognitive function, they can't think straight, they're feeling dizzy, and then they eat and they just feel so much better again. Or it can be losing function after a meal. So somebody eats and then they feel like they just need to go have a nap, or their brain fog kicks in, or their symptoms get a little bit worse, whatever that might be. Increase in pain or a headache or something like that. Poor sleep. So sleep issues can be related to poor blood sugar. Cravings for either caffeine or sugar can be related to poor blood sugar. And sort of that afternoon slump, like needing to have a coffee at 3 p.m. or needing a little bit of a pick-me-up in the afternoon, those can all be signs that somebody has blood sugar issues. So one of the key symptoms I ask my clients to track is just how their energy changes around meals. I think that's something we can all do, we can all pay attention to quite easily. And really what we're looking for is no change in energy around a meal. So if somebody eats, they feel just the same after the meal as they did before the meal. But if there's an energy increase after a meal, there might be more hypoglycemic, which is what you tended towards. Or if someone's energy drops after a meal, there might be more hyperglycemic. So somebody who's tending towards higher blood sugar, which was what I was experiencing.
A lot of people reaching out to me or just chatting in my Facebook group saying that it's a consistent issue with a lot of people that they just really crash after meals and people just don't understand what's happening. So this is really fascinating to hear this because I have not understood that connection either.
Yeah, I mean, it's there can be other reasons as well. So like when you're working on your fatigue recovery, you always have to kind of play the detective, because sometimes if people are reacting to foods that they're eating, and we know that there can be multiple different reasons why people would react to foods, that's something to maybe rule out as well. But the first thing I would want to do with someone like that is check their post-meal blood glucose and see what's going on.
How would they do that if they wanted to go beyond just monitoring their symptoms and trying to assess? Could they get more concrete data or like a more precise picture of what's happening with their blood sugar?
Yeah, so I'm a data geek. So I'm a big fan of gathering data and being a scientist of your own health. Sometimes that can be a little bit overwhelming for some people, just depending on where they are in their journey. But if somebody is up for gathering some data, you can do some self-glucose monitoring. So at the moment on the market, we've got the continuous glucose monitor, which is abbreviated CGM. And that's a little patch you can put on your arm, and it connects to an app. And at any moment in time, you can check your glucose by using an app on your phone. Those are really popular, and I have tried them myself a few times, but I'm a little bit old school, so I like the diabetic sort of finger prick monitors that people are usually more used to. Although it's if somebody has poor circulation in their fingers, or they just don't like needles, it can put them off a little bit. So in which case, the CGM is an alternative option. But what I usually get my clients to do, and I like to check this with every single client just in case, because so we know for sure that their blood sugar is okay, is to get them to test their blood sugar in 45 minutes to an hour after eating. So we're catching the peak of blood glucose after a meal. And then 2 hours later. So ideally, blood glucose should peak and then come down again within those 2 hours. And the range we want blood glucose to be in between the lowest point and the highest point is 4 millimole and 6 millimole, which is, if you're doing the conversion to the American units, it's 72 milligrams per deciliter and 108 milligrams per deciliter. Of course, like a little bit higher is not anything to worry about, because we don't want people to get anxious about this either. But ideally, we want your blood sugar to go as high as 6 or 108 milligram per deciliter and come down to at least 5.5 millimole per liter or 100 milligrams per deciliter after eating. So if that's not happening, so if 2 hours after a meal, someone's blood sugar is still higher than 5.5 or higher than 6, or if that peak is going really, really high and then it's crashing later, those could all be signs of imbalance. And then we would want to start to just get curious. Okay, what's in my food? How could I adjust this? And then continue to track and see what helps you to find a better place of stability. Additionally, if people are getting blood work done from their doctor, they could do, often the doctor will do an glycosylated hemoglobin, which is abbreviated HbA1c. And the cutoff that I would usually use would be anything higher than 36 millimole per mole would be considered high. But even if someone's HbA1c is lower than that, I would still check their post-meal glucose readings just in case. Other little clues could be if they've got elevated triglycerides greater than 1.7 millimole per liter, or if the ratio of their triglycerides to HDL cholesterol is greater than 3. Those are all signs that there could be something going on metabolically, which, as you said, it's not necessarily going to fix the whole thing, but it can have a significant impact on feeling better and more stable day to day.
So it sounds like whether you're doing the more old school finger prick method or wearing the continuous one that's attached to you, the goals of what you're looking for to try to figure out is the same. Because I've been curious, because the ones that people wear are so trendy right now. And I'm always like, well, I need to get one, even though I don't even fully understand why I need one or what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah, well, now you know. And I also think I say someone at least do the continuous one once, because the benefit you get of that is you get just like a lovely graph of your whole glucose throughout the day. and at night while you're asleep. So if you're having wake-ups in the night, you could potentially correlate those wake-ups with blood sugar drops. Like if your blood sugar drops too low in the night, that could be something that's like kickstarting your stress hormones and waking you up. So it is really interesting to have the continuous glucose monitor. A couple of times I've used them and I've not found them as accurate, which is why I tend to the finger prick. But the continuous glucose monitor is nice just to see that trend throughout the day and how things are fluctuating, because you'll be able to see if it's like this up and down or just like a nice, gentle, soft line.
So the whole goal with those is to have that information about your blood sugar. And I'm assuming they come with something that tells you kind of where things should be. And then you identify the areas where it's not in the optimal range. And then you make diet changes accordingly. Is this what people are doing with them?
Yeah, so I think they usually recommend, like, you in the beginning, you don't make any dietary changes, but you just assess what is my current diet doing for me. And then you can change what you're eating. And we'll get into that in a moment, but generally eating more protein and fat and fiber, and then just see how those changes then start to influence the trends.
The sleep one would be really interesting because I know that my sleep is frequently impacted by blood sugar, but I'm never really sure. So sometimes I can't sleep in the middle of the night, so I'll just get up and eat something. I'm not sure if that's why I'm not sleeping. Like I have no idea, but I'm like, well, it's one of the tools in my toolkit to try, addressing my blood sugar and see if that helps. So yeah, that's really intriguing.
Yeah, and then, I mean, in your case specifically, even just playing around with, if you eat certain combinations of food in the evening, do you sleep better? Do you notice a better trend in your blood glucose? So yeah, you can really drill down into all the nitty-gritty details, and it's just another way that another little tool we can use, I guess, to optimize all the variables we can to improve our health. Because I think often when you have this chronic illness experience, it can feel so out of control. So having things that we can control, provided we don't become too controlling, can be really empowering.
Yeah, so many of us that are facing chronic illness issues have such problems with sleep, and it can feel like such a mystery. Like I'm trying everything and it's not getting better. So it's nice that this is one more thing that you can look at, that maybe this is something. Because yeah, for me, addressing it, for a long time, I didn't appreciate how much it was contributing to my insomnia.
Yeah, and you have to sleep to be well. So it's such an important thing to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when we're done here, I'm going to be Googling, getting myself one, but
I highly recommend it.
Well, so you talked about diet. So how does our diet impact this? What can we do? Yeah, let's talk more about diet.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about diet, we want to think about obviously what exactly are we eating, which is really important. But then we also want to think about how often are we eating across the day, because eating 5 or 6 times a day is different to eating 3 times a day or 2 times a day. And for fatigue recovery specifically, we also want to think about the timings of our meals. So are we having set times each day when we eat, or are we eating erratically? And then obviously, the food and the sort of type of macronutrients that we're eating within a meal are really important as well. So from a meal frequency perspective, someone like yourself who previously, had the hypoglycemia, you tended to go towards lower blood sugar. That's often the case when the adrenal glands, which produce cortisol, aren't necessarily functioning as well, and therefore cortisol production is compromised, and therefore we can't keep our blood sugar levels stable physiologically, because cortisol is a hormone that would take sugar out of our liver or our muscle cells, or where we've stored it in the body, and put it into circulation when blood sugar drops low. So someone with low blood sugar, that mechanism isn't operating as well, which means they need, obviously the longer term goal is to stabilize the cortisol, but in the short term, they may need to eat more frequently to keep their blood sugar up. So somebody who's prone to low blood sugar would need to eat more frequently throughout the day. That might be 3 properly balanced meals, but then some snacks in between as well, maybe a mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and even before bed to help with sleep, an evening snack too. But the opposite is true for someone with high blood sugar. Someone with high blood sugar, they're going to eat a meal, and then that blood sugar is just lingering around in their body and it's not going anywhere for a long period of time. So if they're eating frequently, then the blood sugar is potentially just constantly staying high, which isn't going to be good for health. So somebody who tends towards higher blood sugar might just want to stick to 3 meals a day and be really conscious about their snacking. Even in some cases, eating 2 meals a day. As part of my recovery, I would sometimes only eat twice a day and then maybe just have a small snack or something in between. So it was like 2.5 meals a day. And so this is why knowing your pattern can be quite important. Are you somebody who's more prone to hypoglycemia, or are you somebody who's more prone to hyperglycemia? Because the strategy is different depending on which one that you are. In terms of timing, we would definitely want to keep all meals within a 12-hour window. So that's kind of like a standard recommendation, which means if you eat your dinner by 7:30 p.m. in the evening, then 12 hours later will be 7:30 a.m. That's when you'd want to have your first meal of the day, your breakfast, or break your fast. So for somebody who is hypoglycemic, maybe we can stretch the rules a little bit if they do need an evening snack, but remembering that the long-term goal is to, over time, shorten that window so it's 12 hours. But somebody who's prone to more hyperglycemia, higher blood sugar, we actually want to encourage longer periods of fasting so that over time their body is starting to use up the sugar that's in the bloodstream. And therefore, that type of person may want to even condense that window down into 14 hours, or maybe even, condense that window down into 10 hours, or sometimes even 8 hours. So essentially using fasting and to manage their blood sugar. And in which case, they may eat less meals, because it's hard to eat 3 meals a day in an 8-hour window. So that's something that can also to consider as you're looking at diet. But in terms of a sort of food perspective, one of the things we want to think about is actually what's going on your plate. And I always say to my clients, like, protein is your number one. All your meals should be planned around protein, because that's going to be one of the most stabilizing things for blood sugar. Then fiber. So maybe half a plate of food of fiber, vegetables. Those are vegetables that don't grow under the ground, vegetables that grow above ground. And then also your healthy fats. So nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocado, coconut products, those types of things would all be on your plate. And so those are the things that we want to prioritize. And then we kind of want to be avoiding the things which would be destabilizing for our blood sugar, which would be mostly, for the most part, like sugars and processed carbohydrates. Although, even very small amounts of carbohydrate can be problematic for some people. In my own journey, I had to do a full ketogenic diet, so cut out all carbohydrates apart from low carb vegetables for actually 3 years to stabilize my blood sugar. And not everybody has to go to those lengths to achieve blood sugar stability, but some people might. And it's just really important that people know, there's a spectrum. Some people will have to eat a certain way, other people will have to eat very differently. But whatever it is that you have to do, it's really important that you do stabilize your blood sugar.
I found too, because I used to aim for perfection after I was, first recovered, and because I got into the zone of my diet had to be pristine, because I was so desperate to get well. And then I thought, I'm going to eat like this for the rest of my life. This is the new me. And then life kind of came back, and I realized it wasn't so feasible. So for me, I haven't researched this. I've just listened to my own body. But if I do let in some of those like sugary foods or processed foods or white flour, it's almost like caffeine. Like there's a time limit. Like I can't have anything with sugar after about 5 o'clock because I won't sleep. I can't even have like white pasta or pizza for dinner, because all of that white flour that converts to glucose messes me up for the whole night. So is that something that you find with people, that the timing of it also plays into things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything that's going to destabilize your blood sugar later in the day will have an impact on sleep. So absolutely the same as you. In my own journey, I found like if I was ketogenic, but obviously I wasn't ketogenic 100% of the time. There was still every now and again I'd have treats and bits and bobs. So if I was going to have a treat, and even now this is a habit I've continued, I would need to have that treat earlier in the day. So if I was going to have a dessert or a piece of cake or something like that, I would have it at lunchtime, like have a nice lunchtime treat as opposed to an evening treat. And if possible, do a little walk afterwards. So depending on where somebody is in their journey, they might not be able to move afterwards. But if you can move after you've eaten something, which is a little bit more of an indulgence, that can help, just because the insulin receptors in our muscles, as we start to move, they start to soak up the glucose. So that's a little useful tool that you can use if you want to have some treats, but you don't want to pay the price on your blood sugar. So I'd say, yeah, for sure. Also, what we eat first thing, because whatever we eat first thing in the morning, that's going to really set the trajectory for the rest of the day. So if you can have a really nice protein, fat, fiber rich breakfast, that's ideal. If you're going to have anything, it's a little bit more destabilizing for your blood sugar in the day when you're potentially a bit more active, would be a good time. And then really set yourself up well for sleep by having a healthy evening meal.
So is it all about food and what we eat, or are there other lifestyle things that impact all of this?
Yeah, so I think I've mentioned one already, which is movement. The more we move, the more we can use up glucose in our bloodstream. And that's always obviously a tricky one for fatigue, because not everybody can move, and not everybody can move as much as other people. So, if you can do a little walk after your meals, that's ideal, but that might not be in your capacity right now, and nobody should have to feel bad about that. We just need to move at the capacity that we can move, in wherever we are in our journey. But if you are able to walk, if you are able to do a little workout, or a little yoga flow or something like that, that's going to help. Walking after meals, or moving after meals is great. I found in my own journey, I went from being like very fit, very strong, very active, to like basically just being able to walk. And then that was still very, very gentle walking. But as I got more and more well, I was able to be more active and then build more muscle mass. And then doing that, as I've done that, I've been able to increase what carbohydrate I can tolerate as time has gone on. So maybe also just to say there, if you are somebody like me who had to have a very restrictive diet as part of your recovery, it's not forever, but it might just have to be what you need to do now so that you can get that next leg up in your journey. Other things, obviously, stress is a really big one. I mentioned already about cortisol being the hormone that pulls out our stored glucose and puts it into circulation. And so if we're stressed, and we've got high levels of cortisol, that's going to keep sugar potentially in the bloodstream for longer, which can have an impact on high blood glucose. So if you're somebody who struggles with high blood glucose, having stress management practices, nervous system self-care practices, those are all going to be helpful. On the flip side, somebody who has low cortisol, they're not necessarily producing enough cortisol to stabilize their blood sugar. We want to have strategies that help with that as well. Sleep, which is a bit of a vicious cycle, chicken or egg situation, because if our blood sugar is unstable, we're not sleeping. If we're not sleeping, that further destabilizes blood sugar. So we've kind of just got to find some way to start to work on both, whether that is restorative practices or nervous system practices to help with sleep, whether that is playing around with diet to get us sleeping better, or using supplements as well could potentially be beneficial. And then I think you mentioned caffeine, and so that's another one, because it increases our stress hormones, and we want to cut down on caffeine.
Yeah, it's one of the many reasons I still drink coffee, but I make it about 95% decaf, because caffeine, it's really, I call it like my placebo coffee. In the morning, I'm like, oh, my coffee, even though there's not really much caffeine in there. But I've definitely found things that will give me a blood sugar crash. Caffeine is one of them. And just my energy overall. It just gives me a really kind of dramatic high and then a really dramatic low, which I've come to term and isn't really worth it.
Yeah, I actually I used to be like a really strong coffee in the morning, hit the gym
Mm.
and work out really hard. I don't know how I used to do it all. And I even did drink really strong coffee for about my first year of experiencing chronic fatigue. And then just something kind of changed. And then it also just used to make me so jittery and I would just break out in sweats. And so now I also only drink decaf, but I like to keep it for if I go out for like a coffee, so it feels really special. But mostly at home, I have green tea now, which although it has caffeine in, because somebody might want to know that green tea does have caffeine, but it tends to be a little bit more slow releasing, so less likely to give you crashes.
Yeah, that's probably the smarter way to go. I just have such a emotional relationship with my coffee experience, but one day.
we all need our treats. We all need our treats.
But yeah, when I was really sick, well, actually, when I was kind of in the middle stages of sick, and I tried going back to work and it was a disaster. I was not ready to go back to work. And I started drinking really strong coffee, thinking that it was helping me. And in the morning it did, but then my afternoons were just not even livable. Like I would just drop like a rock. So I slowly, as an experiment, started backing off the coffee and got to 0. And although I wasn't, I still had CFS, but I could get through my days. I didn't recognize, because you can have all these symptoms coming out, seems like out of nowhere. And sometimes you forget that, okay, maybe there are some specific things that are causing this, like why every afternoon is absolutely brutal for me. It might just not be some mysterious CFS wizard throwing symptoms at my way.
Yeah.
It might be something that I'm doing.
I think that's such an important point because people often don't equate what they did like first thing in the morning to what's happening at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. But just to say, if you are somebody who is noticing those afternoon energy crashes, that could be a blood sugar issue. And in your case, it seems like it was really exacerbated by the caffeine consumption. So yeah, we kind of have to, sometimes backtrack across the day and sort of see what's going on.
Yeah. So then the afternoon I'd switch to sugary drinks to get me through. Like I really was just a disaster. But I think anyone
you're just
watching
trying to do your best and just trying to cope.
You're on survival mode. You're like, I'm trying to go back to work. I've got this job. How do I get through it? I've got to do what I got to do. But yeah, ultimately I had to leave that job because and I was in a bad crash for quite a while afterwards because I just wasn't ready. So yeah, listening to your body, very important, and not trying to ignore the symptoms that are there. And you had mentioned also supplements, because I think back to one point in my journey, I was taking literally about 100 pills a day of supplements that my doctor had suggested. So I'm just thinking about all the things we put in our body and how that impacts our blood sugar. Does that have any sort of impact on our blood sugar?
Yeah, there can be supplements that positively impact blood sugar. The one I tend to use mostly with clients is chromium, which is like a really cheap and cheerful option for people to take. But I do hear you about all the different supplements that we can take. And I think, in any kind of fatigue sort of case, I think it's always really helpful not to try and do too many things at once. So sometimes they're like, I'm going to take this for this issue and that for that issue and this for this issue. And then I've been there myself. With just so many pills and supplement, it's expensive to begin with, but also you just get so fatigued and fed up of taking them all. So I think it's really important, like when people are taking supplements, I do believe in the power of supplements. I know that some people are a bit anti-supplement, but I really do think supplements can be effective. But it's about choosing the right things for the most important issues you want to work at the time. And so taking a supplement to help you support your blood sugar, because it is such a foundational principle, could be really beneficial. So I used chromium in my own journey, and that was really beneficial. There are some others as well, like berberine, green tea, alpha lipoic acid, fish oil may also be beneficial, but chromium is just cheap, cheerful, and it does the job for the most part.
That's amazing. This is the first time I've ever heard of this. I'm going to absolutely look into that.
So it's chromium percolinate is the form or the chelate that you would want to take. And I think I was taking just 200 micrograms of the meal, but I think you can take up to 1,000 micrograms a day. So if people need a little bit more, they can take more. But obviously check your interactions with any medications you're on so that you remain safe.
Absolutely. Okay. Very helpful to know. Sorry, there is a question here in the chat I am ignoring. Terry wants to know specifically, what would an ideal breakfast look like? I think that's such a good question because we all hear that we need to start the day strong. So what does that look like?
Well, I'll be biased and I'll just tell you what I eat for breakfast because obviously that's what I eat, what I think is ideal. But a really great person to follow on this kind of topic is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. So that's Lyon. She has a really great podcast and Instagram profile, but she's an expert in protein. And her research says that we should start the day with at least 30 grams of protein. So what that means is not if you have a little 30-gram piece of chicken, you're done. It's the actual protein content within the food. So 2 eggs, for example, is 12 grams of protein, and 100 grams of chicken breast raw uncooked is 20 grams of protein. So you don't have to eat chicken breast for breakfast. You could, but basically what you're looking for is some kind of combination of foods which gets you to that 30 grams of protein mark. So how I achieve that in my breakfast is I might do 2 eggs. I'll have a little bit of smoked salmon, which is maybe about another 10 to 15 grams of protein. And then I might have like a dense sort of seed bread, or when I was keto, I had a keto bread recipe, which I used, which was about 10 grams of protein. So the combination of all of those gives you about 30 grams. So it would be some kind of bread, depending on your tolerance, if it needs to be gluten-free or whatever, some eggs, some smoked salmon. You can put some cream cheese if you're okay with dairy, and I do that with some spinach and tomatoes. And that's what I have most days at the moment for breakfast.
Yeah, a good reminder that protein, I mean, meat is probably the highest source, but some of the other foods on our plate also have protein as well. So like you said, those dense breads and different things, so take that all into account. I'm wondering, like, my personal trainer just recently got me using one of these macros counters, and I've realized that,
oh yeah,
at least according to this, I'm not eating anywhere near enough protein. And the only thing I can think, because I just can't even stomach the idea of adding any more meat into my day. So what about protein powders and those sorts of supplements?
Yeah, protein powders can be really helpful for people who've expressed exactly what you've expressed, like I just can't eat any more meat. I've actually just been planning some of my social media for next week, and I've done like a little example of 150 grams a day of protein and what it actually is. And I know it's going to shock people, but you could have, for example, like a protein smoothie could be another option. The challenge with smoothies is if somebody isn't very carb tolerant, the fruit can sometimes spike blood sugar. But if you're adding in some like some seeds, some avocado, maybe some coconut milk, you've got like a little bit of frozen berries, which tend to be lower in sugar, and then some protein powder. That could be another way to get a good chunk of protein in, especially first thing in the morning. I know you interviewed Lauren previously, and she must have spoken about bone broths, maybe when you talked about digestive health and gut health. So bone broths are another great protein source. You can have it like as a little snack, just drink it like a hot drink, and that will probably give you about 10 grams of protein per cup. So it's all adding up across the day. You know, if you have a little mug of bone broth and a little 30 grams of almonds, that's going to be about 15, 16 grams of protein. So, you know, that could be a good snack. And then, you know, maybe some chicken in your lunch and a salad or something, and then some sort of form of meat in the evening or fish in the evening. And then another little hack is you can also supplement. So instead of having fish with rice, for example, you could have fish with lentils, and the lentils would be a higher protein source. I can't remember the exact amount. I think it's about 10 grams per 100 grams. So, you know, that cuts, you still maybe have to eat some meat, but you can cut down on the portion size by adding some higher protein sides, like lentils or even broccoli is a high protein vegetable.
Very helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, lots of little hacks. I've been teaching people how to eat more protein for many, many years. And while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, shall we talk a little bit about fasting?
Yes, I think that would be great.
Because I realized I did start to sort of mention about how it could be helpful for some people, but it might not be helpful for everyone. And I think fasting is very popular at the moment. I don't know if you see many questions about it in your communities, Raelan, but some people are quite confused about whether or not it would be beneficial for them. Or some people have heard that it's beneficial and they've thought like, no way, I could never do that. So it's really important to understand that if somebody is malnourished, they're really thin, they're struggling to put on weight, they're not really able to eat that much, or they're prone to low blood sugar, that's not someone we want fasting. That's somebody that we want to really be stabilizing and nourishing first and foremost before they even consider fasting. So in that case, that person wants to stabilize the frequency of their meals, having those set meals at set times, keeping everything really nice and stable, and then optimize the contents within the meals and really give themselves time to find stability over weeks and months. But if you're somebody who is quite stable, but you're still kind of struggling with high blood sugar after meals, then fasting is something that can be really beneficial. And I used fasting a lot in my journey. And I talked about that 12-hour overnight window and how you can start to extend it. So you could make that 14 hours and then 16 hours or 18 or even 20 hours. So for the most part, I think 12 to 14 is generally pretty easy to do. But then, you could play around with extending that longer. And again, listen to your body, see how it responds. In my own journey, I did some longer fasts. So I did a few 24-hour fasts. I used to do that once a month, just one day of the week. I would do a 24-hour fast, and even some 36 and 42-hour fasts. But I think the important thing to say is I didn't throw myself into that. It was something that I gradually built up to over time. And it is important if you're fasting that you stay hydrated, you take electrolytes, those types of things.
That's really helpful. And it makes a lot of sense. I experiment around with intermittent fasting and all different types of fasting all the time because I just have read so many things. There's so much out there telling you how good it is for you and how, calorie restriction is the key to longevity. So I'm just playing around with it and all that, that time for your body to have a break from digestion. And elimination and all that taxing stuff so it can focus on other things. But I have noticed sometimes it serves me well and sometimes it does not. I tried shortening my fasting window or shortening my eating window, and I essentially was skipping dinner. And it took me weeks to realize, because for weeks I didn't sleep well. And then finally the little light bulb went off. I'm like, wait a minute, what if it's the food? So I tried just having a nice kind of healthy light dinner one evening, slept like a baby.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So,
I think if you're going to fast, like I think you should definitely eat before, not straight before you go to bed, but have a meal before you go to bed. And even, when I would do those longer fasts, so then if I did a 36 or 42-hour fast, there is one period of one evening when you won't eat anything, but I would still do like something like a little cup of soup stock or something like that, just to have something in my stomach. But even then you don't sleep that great. But because you're not doing it every day, it's okay. It's like a short-term sacrifice for a longer-term gain.
I saw another question pop up, and this is a good one. People ask me this all the time, and I do not know the answer. For protein powders, are some better than the other, or what kind should people be using?
Yeah, I think, I'm happy to mention some brands here in the UK, but I don't know all the American brands, unfortunately. But I think, first of all, you want to decide what type of protein you want. So the best in terms of actual protein content is going to be a whey protein. But whey is a dairy. Some people don't get on with dairy so well. So that's a consideration. But if you tolerate dairy, fine, and you have no concerns about taking dairy, then I would say a whey protein isolate would be the best option. I prefer things without artificial sweeteners. So if anything, if it's sweetened with stevia, it's probably a better choice. But if it's got sucralose or aspartame or any of these other more chemical-based sweeteners, I'll probably steer clear of that. If whey isn't an option, or you want sort of more of a vegan choice, you could choose something like a rice protein or a pea protein. For the most part, these are well tolerated, so there shouldn't be any issues with food reactions, but it is on a case-by-case basis. In the UK, I use I really like the Pulsin brand, Pulsin. I don't think that they are in the US. And there's also Form is another great brand here in the UK. They've got like a mixture of different options. Those are the top two I recommend most often to clients. Unfortunately, I'm not quite sure of the US options.
No, that's still very helpful, even just to know generally what to look for, because I'm still unclear what the best ones are. And should I be going for the plant-based ones or the whey, or what is the best? But it sounds like if you can tolerate it, if you do eat a diet that includes animal products, then the whey protein is a good way to go.
Yeah, and there's actually a protein here in the UK called Way to Go. So that's an organic, probably like an organic whey. I mean, if it's within your budget, that will probably be the best choice, provided there's no other issues with the dairy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Anna. This has been so informative. Blood sugar impacts virtually all of us. So I think it's just such great information for people to have. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this. So thank you for doing this today.
It's such a pleasure. I'm always happy to collaborate with you, Raelan. You do such fantastic work in the world, and I know that you're helping a lot of people. So very, very happy to be here.
For those of you watching, I could gush about Anna all day long. I just have so much respect for her. She's such a good person. She's so knowledgeable. She uses her type A, classic sort of overachiever, what you want to call it, personality to just educate herself as much as possible. And then with that, to try and help as many people as possible. So I really recommend you checking out her website and her other information, because she's got a lot of really great stuff there. And for those of you who are watching the recorded YouTube version after the fact, everything that you need to know about Anna, to learn about the work that she does, to follow her and learn more, will be in the video description. So I really encourage you to expand that and take a look and click on some of those links, because she's just a great person to have in your life in some capacity. Even if you just follow her on Instagram, you're going to get a ton of information. So yeah, thank you again to Anna, people here live, people who are watching after the fact. Sending big hugs to you. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of this. And yeah, all the best with your blood sugar and food journey.